All right, welcome to the Milford Board of Selectmen meeting, September 11th, 2017. The first and only agenda item is the town administrator regarding the approval of the special town meeting warrant. Rick, when I was going through the warrant earlier over the weekend, is there a reason, or I would like to, I guess, pass over Article 2 and 5 until the October town meeting? If I don't know if the board would have an issue with that at this point.
I don't, Mr. Chairman.
Mike? And then if we can vote on, however, Rick, do you want to vote on each one of the articles or just the warrant with that caveat?
I am getting some of those.
Not include them, I'm sorry. But put them on for the October meeting, because maybe by then we'll have... Exactly. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we propose for the warrant for the September 26th, 2017 meeting, those items that are included in our packet, excluding Article 2 and Article 5, and with our intentions that we want to communicate to the FinCom that we will be taking Article 2 and Article 5 forward, but in the October town meeting.
Is there a second?
I would second that.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I'll also vote in favor and make that unanimous.
One question, though. Rick, you need to be assigned tonight. Yeah. It's my suggestion that is leave them in and we'll just pass them over. Let's physically just have these.
Yeah, we can communicate why there. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that'd be great.
All right.
You get the original, you can sign it. You know,
And we'll pass them over on September 26th, Jerry. Okay.
Okay, and that was unanimous. Is there any other business? With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn the Milford Board of Selectmen meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adjourn the meeting and go right to the public forum.
Second that?
And I'll also vote in favor and make that unanimous.
I'll finish signing.
Take all the names of the individuals. Who's doing the intros? They can introduce themselves.
Okay.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. My name is Will Kincaid. I'm chairman of the Milford Board of Selectmen. I've never been accused of that. Is that better, Joe? Okay. My name is Will Kincaid. I'm chairman of the Milford Board of Selectmen. Thank you for coming, and for those viewing at home. This is our second public forum regarding the acquisition or possible acquisition of the Milford Water Company. We wanted a number of public forums prior to the town meeting where this will need to be voted on, and either, if acquired, would require a 2/3 vote. This has been a long time coming, many years of consideration, and most recently, a deep dive into what we call the due diligence of this process, which included all the finances of the Milford Water Company and what it would mean for the town of Milford to purchase that. The Board of Selectmen had hoped to come to you earlier initially in this process when we were planning everything, and we kept, with every bit of information that was presented to us, the three of us kept asking and requiring more information. So that's why the timeline was postponed a little bit. It wasn't because there was a time where work wasn't being done. It was a time where more and more information was coming, and a lot of things have changed since our last public forum, which is why we wanted to be here tonight and to be able to present to you folks. But it is time now for the town of Milford to make a decision on the future of the Milford Water Company. While reviewing results point strongly in favor of the town purchase, the most compelling reason is for users to control decisions that impact quality of water that the families of Milford drink. Right now, obviously, the Milford Water Company is a privately held company, and we, as a government, do not have any control over customer service or the quality of water. So there aren't any local bodies that you can hold accountable. But we do want to hear, we want you to hear how we've arrived at this decision to recommend town meeting moving forward with the purchase. We're going to run quickly through a top-level agenda and obviously have a Q&A session, and I look forward to that. Again, thank you for coming, and now I'd like to introduce my colleague Bill Buckley, who's going to discuss the due diligence. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Part of what we're calling due diligence, I would just want to explain to everybody who may be like myself, who's never personally acquired a company themselves. Due diligence is a series of processes that you go through in order to understand where the risks are and how to mitigate those risks. You take experts within the field, both from a water system standpoint, engineering standpoint, tax standpoint, and legal standpoint, and you continually set them off to understand either more and more, as we'll talk to, or just greater understanding that they would do during the normal course of due diligence. So I want to talk about what some of those things are just off the top. We sought to understand the financial performance of the Milford Water Company. We wanted to understand what their cash was. We wanted to understand what their profits were better than what we understood when we started this process. And we wanted to understand where their expenditures were. It was very important for us. A major concern that we had was during a time of plenty, that is this year, without restrictions, without drought conditions, why is it that the Milford Water Company was not selling as much water as it could, and we were suspect to certain conditions that might exist at the Milford Water Company? So we wanted to look at audited financial statements and those claims made by the water company. We wanted to look at any liabilities. Any liabilities that the company had, we wanted to better understand to make sure that we didn't take any of those over, and we've made sure that through this process we have the appropriate safeguards not to take over any additional liabilities. We wanted to understand what its future growth potential was. How much water could you take out and how much could you sell? And to what extent were they efficient at doing that? What working capital was necessary in order to operate the business? What capital expenditures or any other investments were made? And were they meeting their obligations to those capital investments? What was their operating budget? How much was being deferred? How much was being expended? Whether there were any loans out, who was responsible for those loans, whether they were to employees, other businesses, corporate officers, anyone. We wanted to understand what those liabilities were. We even went to make sure there was no beyond just software that operated the plant, were there any intellectual property or software issues. During the normal course of acquisition of any company, people would look into, experts would look into whether there was anything proprietary or whether there was any intellectual property concerns either used from somebody else or owned by the Milford Water Company. We wanted to understand whether it made a good strategic fit for the town. Being one of 5 or 6 municipalities in the state that have a privately run water company, we understood strategically, but we wanted to make sure that if there was anything else out there, we wanted to understand that if there was a rock to find, we wanted them to uncover it. We wanted to understand if their contracts, guarantees made to anyone, agreements, partnership, joint ventures, employment agreements, We wanted to understand indemnification. How would we indemnify ourselves, and what are the challenges in that indemnification process when you acquire a company? Real estate, purchase agreements, employee contracts, pensions were all studied. Any potential either threatened or pending litigation was also reviewed. Employee benefits, retirement plans. We wanted to understand if there was evidence of compliance with IRS in connection with stock issuances. That's important because this is a private company and they have issued stock. Also, any insurance claims, insurance benefits. Together with, we wanted to understand who the carriers were and to what extent they were insured. And any pending threatened regulatory actions, either with DEP, DPU, or any other federal agency we looked into. There are challenges in some of these, and I think Jed will talk to that next. But I would tell you that I wasn't sold on this process throughout. It wasn't an effort by me, let me say it that way, or by the board members, to have an assumption built in and then prove that assumption correct. I was never sold until very recently that this was the right thing to do, and why that's why that letter went to you with my signature. That meant a lot to me personally, that before I penned that letter and before I signed that letter, that it had my full blessing, and I had done everything I could to understand what the process was. But I would tell you the greatest risk we uncovered, in my opinion, was the risk that the Milford Water Company were to continue to own that operation and run it. And I think what you'll see is evidence tonight about capital and investments that explain some of the challenges the Milford Water Company has been doing. And I do want to say one last thing because it's not on the agenda, but it should have been mentioned. It's our intention to hire as many employees as would like to come to the town of Milford system. That it would exclude management. And I say that for a reason. I think culturally, that's in large part where the problems have existed for years, over a very long period of time. I don't think the employees go to work every day trying to deliver brown water or subpar quality. I think they're trying to do the right thing every day. There are certain restrictions that come from management. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jed to talk about some of the challenges were uncovered during due diligence. Thank you.
Thanks, Selectman. Thank you, Selectman Buckley. My name is Jed Nozel. I'm counsel at the law firm of Brown Rudnick. We've been retained by the town in order. We've been retained by the town in order to provide various legal services throughout this transaction, including the due diligence review that Selectman Buckley just mentioned. The due diligence, as Selectman Buckley mentioned, was broken into essentially two big parts. One legal due diligence, the other financial. Brown Rudnick and its team took on the legal due diligence, and the Lincoln Group has taken on the financial due diligence and some of the business practices of the company. I will note that there are very comprehensive reports issued by both Brown Rudnick and the Lincoln Group that are available on the website that go through exactly what we looked at, what questions were asked, and essentially what our findings were. And I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes, not necessarily to go through a laundry list of what those findings are, because there were things that we put into the category that I would characterize as actionable items. Items that don't prohibit this transaction from going forward, but rather things that we're going to want to have addressed by the company prior to us signing that final agreement. Either they can do that voluntarily, or that we'll ask that those things are actually done in connection with that document. As Selectman Buckley indicated, we reviewed thousands of pages of documents that were requested. They were posted in a secure data room, reviewed by various different groups within my law firm, including those with backgrounds in corporate, ERISA, real estate, environmental, and regulatory matters. And we concentrated on the areas that Selectman Buckley has gone through. For those actionable items, we hope, again, that we'll be able to get the company to agree to address some of those. We've made a lot of progress on that front. A good example of that would be in connection with how we're going to deal with the company's current defined pension fund that it has. There's a very specific process that companies go through when there's a change in control in order to deal with that pension, deal with its employees, ensure that they're dealt with fairly, and from our perspective, on behalf of the town, to ensure that the town isn't picking up any exposure in connection with that arrangement between the employees and the Milford Water Company. That's something I have confidence, certainly, that we're going to be able to deal with and deal with responsibly and in a fair way, and again, to ensure that the town doesn't incur any liability as a result of that. Other things that we can't come to a resolution to, or we just don't feel comfortable with the documentation that we've seen from the company, we'll essentially want those then to be covered in our final agreement through representations and warranties. In these circumstances, the company will be compelled by way of an indemnification clause to defend the town should any issue come up down the road, certainly hold us harmless for that, and make sure, again, that the town is fully protected and we don't take on any liability or risk that is not part of this transaction. And it's been our job to identify those, identify the ones we should be able to deal with, and then the ones that we're going to want further representation and warranties from the company as part of our final agreement. I'll give just a brief example on that. For instance, if you look at the report that Brown Rudnick did, you'll see a lot of information regarding past environmental issues with the water company. In those circumstances, in many of those circumstances, the water company has provided us with ample documentation to demonstrate that those matters have been closed and resolved. In other cases, they haven't been able to give us the documentation that satisfies us, at least at this point, that there's no outstanding issue. So there we would want a representation and warranty from the company that if something comes up at a future date, it's their responsibility and not the town's. And those will be all worked into the final definitive agreement that will exist in order to close this transaction. I do want to say, having certainly been dealing with the selectmen on this, they pushed us hard in order to make sure that we turned over every stone. And you can see there are even various versions of our report that you'll see that went through work as it progressed to come up with our final report. This was a thorough process. And at the end of the process, and I've said this before, I really felt that the selectmen, in what they gathered, what they required us to do, really ended up probably understanding the Milford Water Company better than the Milford Water Company itself. So with that, I appreciate the time. I'm sorry if you couldn't hear my last statements. And I guess I'll turn it over to now, I think, Zach. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Zachary Taylor. I'm the finance director for the town. I presented at the last forum, and at that time, we definitely have some changes that we're going to share with you tonight, and I'm hopefully going to give you a nice step-by-step view of how we got to these conclusions. I believe it's no secret that everyone has read the newspaper, and we realize that there is a necessity for a rate increase, and I'm hoping to accomplish tonight to make sure everyone understands how we got to this conclusion. So at the time of the last forum, it was made clear that we were going to have financial due diligence. We were in the process at the time. We used a consulting firm known as the Lincoln Group. They are here tonight. They were really fantastic and helped us tremendously throughout this process. They were very involved. I talked to them on a daily basis, weekends, vacations, holidays, nonstop to try to get prepared for tonight and to really make sure that what we developed as assumptions were true. So the biggest skeptic at the time that I had after presenting what you folks may know as Schedule A, developed by Russell Consultant, was the necessity to borrow additional funding to pay for capital over a 10-year period totaling $14 million. It's a huge number, and so was it $63 million right off the bat. of borrowing. So at that time, it was presented as an industry standard, which it is. We're doing it right now with the sewer department. However, we don't have $63 million on the books of which we're paying for at the sewer department. So that situation, as it may be an industry standard, it was just way too much debt, and it would have put this enterprise fund in a situation that really would have been overwhelmed with debt payments and would not allow for future capital improvements and whatnot. At that time, you also heard me present goals and objectives of what we tried to adhere by for financial strategy. One of which was rate stability. You heard us talk a lot about that, and we presented a plan at the time that did accomplish rate stability. The bigger goal that following that we really needed to pull into was the desire to actually make proper improvements to the system in the form of quality and quantity to assure proper quantity. So when those two mixed, it became very evident that we could not keep rate stability at 2.5%. And it was also quite clear, as everyone knows, that right now that the water company is going for a 30% rate increase. So we're looking at that and asked ourselves, okay, what do they need that we will also need? So part of the due diligence was to go very deep into the audited financial statements. Selectman Bill Buckley spoke a little bit about. We also had a whole variety of different sections of what we reviewed. Among those topics, we're looking at employees. So this industry is pretty predictable when it comes to salaries and wages, when it comes to operational expenditures, when it comes to debt. What's not predictable is capital expenditures. The selectmen were very adamant that we do a very deep, detailed analysis of capital, and that's where we really found ourselves looking at each other and developing a different plan. So one mitigation option that was not going to be a possibility was to kick the can. Why would we move forward and just have more of the same of what we're dealing with now? So we knew we could not sacrifice capital. Capital was a necessity. It's something that we needed to do, and it's something that we reviewed heavily. Some of the findings throughout this process was over the past 3 years, the Lincoln Group determined that the Milford Water Company had been marginally profitable. One big assumption everybody was working off of was the fact that if you removed profits, if you removed taxes, depreciation, items that a public company would not pay, then the town could actually do it cheaper. As that may be true if the company was gifted to us, say, it did not become true when you break down a $63 million bond acquisition. When you look at the actual numbers, it was determined that the town would in fact pay more for the same expenses, to the tune of around $800,000. When you look at the profitability, or the restricted profitability over the past few years of the Milford Water Company, it made it difficult for them to actually accomplish some of the capital improvements that they probably should have been doing over the years. So they sacrificed it, they did not do it. One factor was, in fact, that they put the new treatment plant in place, which was a lot of money, and it did push a lot of the other suggested capital improvements aside. We reviewed an engineering study from 2010 that was a 15-year plan developed from Tatter and Howard that had a $24 million capital plan. Throughout this, since 2010, we found that they have only actually executed around $2 million of it. It's a huge number. It's about 90% unfinished. When the Milford Water Company is struggling with profits and they don't have the money to do the capital, it presents a lag time where they need to go to the DPU to actually get a rate increase to do this. If this was town-owned, we would not have that restraints. We would be able to do it ourselves. Over the years, they did go through a process of where they had a relatively low level of capital expenditures to a new, more appropriate level, but in my opinion, what had happened and what we had found was that they're left playing catch-up. As I mentioned, there's around $22 million left on this capital plan. And this is 7 years in at this point. So we sacrifice quality, sacrifice quantity, and we're left with the situation we're in right now. So if we're to take over this system, there's promises, there's dedication that we actually want to deliver proper quality to the customers and ensure proper quantity for the future. In order to do this, like I mentioned, we cannot sacrifice capital. It's a must. It's a capital-intense industry. It always will be. And if anything, right off the bat, we would need to play catch-up, as I mentioned. So part of the capital review was to develop a risk analysis and to really review a low, medium, and high level of capital expenditure plan, and then adopt that and translate it into what would be acceptable rate increases moving forward. We ended up going with the medium plan. We were concerned about the bite off more than you can chew factor, and we certainly wanted to demonstrate results. When you apply this plan to our existing assumptions, which, by the way, expenditures and revenue assumptions weren't too far off. The original plan did assume a 2.5% increase across the board, as I mentioned, but at the same time, it also assumed steady increase in actual volume. This new model put together assumes a drought year every 4 years and reduces by 10%, followed by an immediate 10% increase to make up. So it's a little more realistic, if you will. The plan we have together right now also doubles capital expenditures from what the last 3 years were, would double for the next 3 years. Last 3 years was approximately $3 million. The next 3 years planned right now that we feel we can execute within the plan presented, $6 million. There's definitely a short-term need to increase water supply, and there's definitely a short-term need to increase water quality. And through this process, we feel we've identified a lot of the issues that could potentially be done. We've translated that to appropriate monetary value, and we've provided it into this model, and we've come up with a range of potentially 15 to 30%. A number of recommendations were also derived from the work that the Lincoln Group had done. One of which would be not to do any of that additional borrowing that was proposed in the first scenario, Schedule A. That was for a number of reasons. One, it's just, as I mentioned, it's not a good idea to take on that much debt. Two, it may not even be possible given the various coverage ratios that we'd have to accomplish. At that last forum, I mentioned that we would have to go through various checks and balances, one of which is Moody's analyst. We don't think we'd pass the test, and further, even if we could, it's just not a good idea to take on that much debt. So this plan over 10 years would not assume any additional debt. It would all be pay-as-you-go in the operational budget, or it would be a result of appropriating additional funds out of retained earnings. Either way, the revenue models seem efficient, given 15 to 30% increase to be able to cover not only operational expenditures, salaries, but this modified, very strong capital plan that should accomplish both water supply and water quality. If we move forward, we would absolutely need to take that plan and really dig significantly deeper and develop a 10-year plan. That would be something the water commissioners would be involved with. That would be something that we would take and make sure that year 1, year 2, year 3 has appropriate strategy as far as appropriation. And we would have to make sure we have the proper financial oversight and governance of this new enterprise fund. One of the goals we talked about from the get-go was making sure that all money remains in the enterprise fund. This model still accomplishes this. However, we want to, you heard earlier the selectmen talking about the warrant coming up, one of which will be an article that is going to need an appropriation or basically an immediate infusion for working capital from something like stabilization, I would propose, into the enterprise fund to get it kicked off. Over the next couple months is going to be very, very intense with negotiating the purchase and sales agreement, in which a lot of items such as working capital and startup costs and all that really, really needs to get brought to center stage and put together properly. So if moving forward, that's really the next project and the next set that we're going to be looking at. We'd also, as Selectman Buckley mentioned, we absolutely need to hire a new general manager, a competent general manager. We found through this process that that is a necessity. You need proper leadership and someone that knows how to direct this business and knows how to move forward. So that's something that should happen sooner rather than later. And I mentioned providing additional money to finish off the purchase and sales agreement and move forward. I take it up there'll be a lot of questions tonight, and we'll be able to answer them in greater detail. I'd like to present Jerry Moody, who's going to take and discuss further the transaction. Thank you.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Jerry Moody, of course, Town Council, and I'll be very brief, and what I'm going to just talk about is where we will be going, assuming the possibility of an affirmative vote at the September 26th town meeting. As the chairman indicated, that's going to take a 2/3 vote, which is a substantial amount. It'll be a very serious matter, and if that 2/3 vote is achieved, you're going to see within the warrant a number of other articles that are going to have to be dealt with that night. If that's defeated, those articles will be passed over. You'll see a couple of articles in there dealing with additional funds, both to continue the process up to the date of closing and what Zach just referred to in terms of seed money. Those are going to be passed over that night and will actually be handled at the October town meeting. But there'll be articles in there. One will be just, sounds very basic, to establish a water department. But that has to be done to accept a certain act of the legislature, which will put us operating under the provisions of the general laws and all the rights and responsibilities that go with that, and that'll be an important part of the process. And as Zach also mentioned, there'll be an article in the warrant to establish the enterprise fund. That has to be done by accepting a certain statute, just as we did many years ago for the sewer department. Again, we think very effectively, and they've operated as an enterprise fund since then, and the goal with this is that once it's up and running, it will operate as an enterprise funds within its own revenues brought from the water users, and of course, thus not impacting the taxpayers or the tax rate. There'll also be an article in there that would allow for special legislation that, if passed, would allow for a borrowing of up to 40 years. That may be problematic. There may not be time to get that through the legislature to benefit us, but in our view, it's worth that effort to see if that can be in place, because that could be, if it passed and could be utilized, could be a significant benefit in terms of helping with the funding of the entire operation. And you'll also see the last article, a simple one, which will seek special legislation which would authorize the dissolution of the water company. Once everything is in place, once we've closed on this transaction, which is a very, very complicated transaction, including a transfer of stock to the town, there are ways within the typical business law system that corporations are dissolved, but we want to make absolutely sure this is a unique kind of corporation. It's a corporation that's chartered by an act of the legislature in 1881. So everything else we'll do to dissolve it, the final thing we'll do, hopefully through the special legislation and then a vote by the Board of Selectmen to finally dissolve the Milford Water Company and be totally separated from it. So that's all will happen at town meeting, again, assuming that the first Article 1 passes. Post-town meeting, you've heard a little bit about already of what's going to have to go on, and it's going to be significant. Most importantly is to negotiate the incredible details of a final purchase and sale agreement. That process has already begun, but it'll intensify after town meeting and to arrive at that absolutely most important document with all the protections and the representations and warranties that Jed made reference to are going to be in that. Selectmen in the interim are going to hopefully be able to appoint 3 water commissioners. If you remember from the May town meeting, we sought special legislation to allow the appointment of water commissioners pending the election of water commissioners, which would happen in April. Under the law that we'd be accepting, we would have 3 water commissioners elected, but in that interim period, the selectmen should be able to appoint 3 water commissioners to serve until that next election. And I'm sure the selectmen will move diligently on that, and we can get these people involved in this process and come to understand the system before we actually even take it over. We also will, as Zach mentioned, very importantly, if town meeting goes forward, I think the selectmen will want to move quickly to begin the process with those hoped interim water commissioners to do the kind of search they need to find the best possible management that we can find and get that person in here, perhaps even before we take it over, so there could be a full ability to acclimate that person into the system. Also, things like an RFP will have to be done and get that process going before we actually close on the property, looking to get a company, a backup company on board to handle major emergencies. The typical staff isn't able to do that, so you want to have a company available after a bidding process to do that. And that's something, again, that'll go on between the town meeting and the actual closing. Also, the selectmen are going to have to work with, in the new water commissioners, are going to have to work with employees of the water company to try to transition them into the town if they want to come to the town. That'll involve a lot of discussions about their pay, their benefits, what they are now, what they'll be when they come to the town, and so that they can have a full understanding, which I know they really want to, so they can make an informed decision as to whether they want to come to the town. I mean, the ideal situation, I think everybody would agree, that those employees would come over and bring their experience and their knowledge and keep this system operating efficiently as our new management begins to understand it and develop it for the future. Then, of course, we're going to have to, most importantly, that once we have the purchase and sale agreement in place, then as we get towards the closing date, make sure that all the conditions of that purchase and sale agreement are satisfied. And that's very, very important and a very detailed process. And then we're going to have to, very importantly, effectuate the borrowing through the financial team, through Zach, the town treasurer, actually borrow that $63 million in order to be ready to pay it. And even after that, at the October town meeting, as you heard me mention, there'll be a couple of articles in there to get money to finish out the process I just talked about, and also, as Zach referenced, seed money, if you will, so that there'd be a smooth transition pending the coming of bills from the new water department, so they need to have that working capital for those first several months of the operation. And there'll also be an article in that town meeting in the October to set a budget for the water department for the first time. And that budget will then be what they'll operate under as part of their enterprise fund. So all of that's going to go on between the September town meeting and the closing, presumed to be about December 31st. It's a lot. It's going to be intense. It's going to involve an enormous amount of work, but we're in very good shape right now with what we have done through the due diligence and what we know. And hopefully, if you have any questions about that or any other aspect of it, we can answer it. Thank you.
So I'm going to take the mic out of here so you can hear me, because one of these days you'll build a podium for someone like me. So you heard a lot tonight about the financials and the due diligence, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to walk you through the day-to-day and why it's imperative that the town of Milford buys the Milford Water Company. When I first ran for election, as all of you know, I talked about my concerns of why I was very concerned of why the town would purchase the water company. I stand here tonight in front of you, and after having all the documentation and been in all the executive session meetings that I've been in, I'm telling you right now it's imperative that we purchase the Milford Water Company. Okay? And I'll give you some examples. Right now in the sewer commission, do you know that there are 2 sewer commissioners that ran for election because they had problems in their home? If you have a problem with the Milford Water Company tonight or Friday night at 5:30 and you call with a problem, you call with a brown water problem, you realize you're probably not going to get anybody till Monday morning. We purchased the water company, we set up water commissioners, and you call one of the 3 of us on a Friday night, trust me, we're going to make sure somebody's at your home. And that's just one of the examples that's going to make a major plus. I don't want to use the word mismanagement, but it wasn't in 2009 when there was a catastrophic problem did the water company step up to the plate and try to start spending money the way that they needed to spend to bring the water company to where it needed to be. And while they're doing a much better job today, they're still behind the scenes. That's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable to turn your water on and you have brown water. Selectman Buckley made a great point, How do you charge me more? When I say me, I'm a taxpayer in this community, just like every single one of you. How do you charge me more for my water and you can't supply it? But yet I gotta go replace half of my lawn this year because I couldn't run my irrigation system last year, but you want to charge me more for my water? Does it make any sense? Think about that. If you owned your own business, does that make any sense to you? You supply a product to a consumer, you want to charge the consumer more money, but you can't supply the product? And the reason they can't supply the product, you're all going to find this out later on as we move on down the road, is because they didn't do things properly. They had wells that went down. They had wells that they didn't service. They didn't run the plant properly, okay? These are things that will come under the jurisdiction of the town of Milford, and we will make sure, as the Board of Selectmen, my 3 colleagues, we've committed to this, that we will make sure that these things happen. Now, I understand it's a tough thing. It's a tough buy, because now we're standing in front of you telling you you're probably going to get a 30% rate increase the first year out of the gate. Well, that's necessary. And we can prove to you, and we can show you why. So just trust us. Just trust us. Trust us to show you that we are going to provide you the service and the quality that you deserve as a taxpayer in this community. Okay? Because you're not getting it right now. So if you think you're getting it for a 2.5% increase or 3% increase, don't be fooled. You're not getting the service you deserve. Okay? So, as we always say in private business, you got to spend a little bit in the beginning to get to where you want to go. And sometimes you got to go backwards to go forwards. Okay, and that's kind of where we are right now. We're at a crossroad. It's a major crossroad. $63 million is not a small number. Not a small number. But controlling one of your major resources is a major, major issue. If you do any kind of research around the world and other countries, when they have problems, you know what the problems are? The governments control the resources. They control the water. They control the electricity. So why would we here at the Milford Water Company not want to control our own water and make improvements to it? And I know there are people out there that say, well, how are you going to make improvements to it? To what Zach made a point of, hiring a new general manager that truly understands it. Appointing water commissioners that in their heart have a true desire to make the water company what it should be, to take care of the taxpayers of this community. That's how you do it. You entrust your Board of Selectmen to make the right decisions on a daily basis. You elected us, and trust us. And I can tell you, standing here tonight, when I first ran for election, and I made those statements, and what I have now seen and what I have now read, I can tell you, we need to purchase the Milford Water Company. We need to get it under the control of the town of Milford so that we can move forward. And I understand it's a big expense. Nobody understands that more than me. But honestly, we will make a difference in the management. We will make a difference in the quality of the product that gets delivered to your home every single day. We will do everything that we can to make sure that you never have a shortage supply. Okay? It's unacceptable to live in a town like Milford that's financially as strong as it is. We have finance committee members here. We have the chairman of the finance committee here tonight. They do a phenomenal job. And we live in this community, and we can't supply you water. If you remember last year, Selectman Buckley made a comment. I thought it was really great, to be honest with you. Not that I was concerned. I was upset I couldn't water my lawn, but his next-door neighbor couldn't water his tomatoes. It's unacceptable. It may seem funny, but it's unacceptable. Okay? If you're in business and you're supplying a product to a customer, you have a responsibility to make sure that you can supply that product. And if you can't, don't charge me for it. But yet you can't supply it and you want to charge me more? Unacceptable. So ladies and gentlemen, I stand here tonight. I'm the newest member on the Board of Selectmen. I can tell you that everything that I've seen, there is no doubt in my mind that we need to move forward take this to town meeting, and we need to purchase the Milford Water Company. Okay? Thank you.
We all set for questions and answers? My name is Mike Nofri. I'm the moderator of the town meeting. I see some town meeting members out there. As advertised, this is an information session where we can ask questions and hopefully get answers to those questions. At town meeting, we don't do that. We don't ask questions of the presenter of the motion. So now is your time to ask questions, and hopefully we'll get the answers. We're not here, and I will ask the person to sit down if they are advocating for or against the purchase of the water company. This is not the time to do that. The time to do that is on September 26th at our special town meeting. So what we're going to do is try to get as many people to ask questions as want to ask questions, and there's a microphone in the center of the auditorium where the cameraman is, and what we'll do is we'll form a line in the back of that microphone, and we'll ask the questions from that microphone. Hopefully we'll get an answer to those questions from the presenters that we have here. Okay, so and before you ask a second question, unless it's a real short follow-up, we'll just keep going and get to the end of the line, and you can ask a second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth question. Okay? So those people who have questions based upon the information that we've heard tonight, the additional information, I ask you to start lining up in the center of the auditorium, behind the cameraman. There is a microphone that's live, and again, it's quite a distance out there. I've got these bright lights looking at me, but if I recognize you by name, I'll be glad to. If you can just sort of get, all right, you want to line up that way, that's fine too. Okay. First one is that gentleman right there.
I've heard the due diligence on cash only, basically funding and stuff like that. Has anybody done any due diligence on the infrastructure itself? I've lived in town for 30 years. I've never seen any relining or cement lining of pipes. I've never seen the water company doing anything like that. I'm just curious, has anybody looked at if the system is stable itself?
Jerry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yeah, if you look at the town's website, on there is a report from Woodward and Curran, a competent engineering firm that did come in and do a detailed analysis of the system and found that system to be, and if you look at the report and various of its items, to be good to fair condition. And the due diligence work that we did, and you heard reference to the several $1 million, far less than they should have, several $1 million that has been spent in improvements. We know what their improvements that they've made. We know what the system consists of from every possible perspective. Is it a perfect system? No. But it's in fair condition. The treatment plant, most importantly, is state-of-the-art. So overall, there's a high comfort level that what we're getting will be an adequate system that we can then hopefully significantly improve.
Mr. Arcudi.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Let me thank the Board of Selectmen for holding an open meeting. There's one question that I hope has been covered. The fact that how many people here are town meeting members? Yeah, that's about 1%. We have a very important meeting coming up in 2 weeks, the biggest decision this town is ever going to make. It would behoove those that on this final report by the Lincoln Group that we be included in the mailing of the articles so that the town meeting members have a number of times that they have to digest what's here, because there's a lot of information here. One other question that I have for Zach. You mentioned a $63 million purchase issue over a 30-year bond at 2.5%. Am I correct or not?
It would be 63 million. It would not be 2.5%. As I discussed at the last forum, there would absolutely be an anticipated premium that would more than likely reduce that debt number to be repaid to around 53 million. And when you encompass the premium offered, the true interest cost, as they call it, would be more like 3.8%,
So what would the total cost the town of Milford over a 30-year period?
approximately $100 million.
Plus the fact that we're going to, through a rate increase, $12 million for improvements, which obviously have to be done, because the water company did not do anything.
Correct.
The only thing I'm afraid of, the vote we take is going to affect every man, woman, and child in this town. And I hope the town meeting members are diligent to that effect. Thank you, Mike.
John, next person.
Good evening. My name's Mike Tim. I've lived here in town for about 35 years. And it's my understanding that the $63 million price tag was negotiated. And since that time, there have been quite a number of things to come to the forefront that will cause the town to have to spend additional money, and that perhaps the deal as negotiated or represented to the $63 million price may not be what we were assuming it was at the time. Is that something that can be renegotiated, revisited, or recalculated?
Hi, Mike. Let me say I'm not speaking for the board members. First of all, I'd like to speak for myself because it's hard to, on a fly, vote on everything, right? So we can't possibly do that, so we're representing ourselves. There wasn't anything that came back that suggested that we would have to renegotiate. What came back told us a few things. One, that we would be able to address deficiencies that exist that we're aware of through the indemnifications and the warranties that we get through a purchase and sale, so that we would be held harmless should a series of things happen or somebody materially misrepresented the facts. There is always an opportunity to go back to the table. The flaws that existed, I'll tell you, that are different tonight in our facts than were the first time we presented, were in our own assessment and the way we looked at the borrowing. Right? I don't know if that makes sense, but we assumed some things that Zach talked about, and as a result of one of the consultants that made an assumption that was flawed. So now we've come to understand exactly how it can be financed and the method in which we'd have to borrow and any assumption we would make for rate increases. Essentially what you're looking at is a rate increase that's very similar to what the Milford Water Company is looking at. The other thing that you read when you read the Lincoln Group's information is the capital expenditures that have been coming out of the water company are woefully inadequate. The process by which they purge the pipes, cleanse pipes, line pipes, or chemically treat pipes was inadequate as well. And it's our belief that that contributes to the quality of water issues. Right now, the defense from the management of the Milford Water Company over the quality of water that some people are receiving, and if you watch Fox 25, it was very brown water that nobody would drink, was that the water was fine. So that's some of the challenge that we've had. But no, there's nothing that's taken us back, Mike, to the original drawing board to renegotiate that price. And there wasn't anything that forced me to do that, to think that way, other than to say, all right, we have to button up our due diligence. There's more that we need to understand. And when we're held harmless through indemnification, we better have all our ducks in a row and understand what we need to do. That's why we challenged the consultants to better understand why it was that the Milford Water Company, through a time of plenty and rain, didn't want to sell their community water. I mean, think about that for a second. Right? Mike Walsh talked about my colleague on the board, a company that couldn't provide it. But think about it as a revenue generator, and you own a company. You have all the product and the surface water that you need in terms of Echo Lake and the Charles River. Why not sell it and make money? It was fundamentally flawed. We didn't understand why that was happening. We now better understand the number of wells that were offline, the reason that they couldn't be balanced with surface water and well water to give us a better quality water and all the organics that would come from the surface water pumping. Look, I'm not going to pretend to be a well expert. I'm not going to pretend to be a water company expert, but I've gone through what I would consider as an MBA process for understanding how to acquire a water company, and these guys have done a phenomenal job. Yeah, we pushed. Yeah, we challenged. And those people challenged us to better understand it. But I feel like I do have that understanding, and again, no, nothing drove us back to renegotiate.
Okay, thank you.
Next gentleman, Mr. Darrow, I believe.
Over there, Dan.
Nothing personal.
They're gonna give you a raise.
Zach, you've mentioned 4 additional amounts of money that will be needed that are not in the $63 billion or the capital improvements. Could you specifically tell me the amount needed from the stabilization fund, the seed money, the funds to finish up the process, whatever that means? Excuse me, there were 3. And so that I don't have to stand up here anymore, Mr. Walsh mentioned increasing the quantity of water for the Milford Water Company once we own it. The DPU has specifically prevented that from happening. How is he going to do it? Thank you.
Zach?
Thank you. So I did mention additional funding necessary, and you heard the opening with the selectmen that wanted to defer those articles to the October town meeting. They clearly would like to discuss them further. However, the number that we have come to is between $500,000 and $750,000 from stabilization that would be repayable over time back to the general fund. And the amount of money necessary to complete the transaction, again, needs to be discussed further, but Jerry, approximately $250,000.
Seed money?
Seed money was the $750. $250 would be to complete the transaction.
Okay. So when you talk about stabilization fund, you're talking about seed money and funds to finish the project only?
Not necessarily. Seed money would be stabilization, $500,000 to $750,000, repayable back to the general fund, and the completed due diligence to complete the transaction, legal fees, financial fees, etc. Doesn't necessarily have to be from stabilization, and more than likely would not be from stabilization, more likely be free cash.
Got it. Is there any money going to be taken from stabilization, I guess, is the remainder of the issue?
I thought I made that clear that yes, it would be for the seed money of between $500,000 and $750,000.
Round figure, $1 million. Thank you.
Young lady?
Hi, my name is Susan Hastert. I'm a town meeting member as well. Reading or looking at the Lincoln Group handout, which was very helpful. A study was done in 2014 that Milford current water rates were comparable to the surrounding towns. Now we're talking about being 30% over the surrounding towns, if I understand that. Also referring to the pamphlet, looking at Exhibit 10.1 on the end, the different solutions forecast. 1 calls for a 15% increase next year versus forecast 4 calling for 30%. The only difference I see on that sheet is revenue. So if somebody could explain why option 4 is being recommended for a 30% increase over surrounding towns.
To answer your first question, yes, the chart that you do see did not have 30%. However, when you do include the 30%, it's still within that range. It's at the higher end of the range, but that's also a range of acceptable amounts that we'd like to target throughout this process. So inclusive of the 30% is still within that range. Secondary, you're referring to the last page, which is giving multiple forecasts, which is why we also presented at between 15 and 30%. This is something that once the commissioners are in place would help us determine what the actual percentage would be. But as far as presenting tonight, we wanted to kind of go with that worst case scenario and show you that 30 would be the highest that we would be looking to do. And further, you can see from the very bottom line that it accomplishes every possible capital expenditure that we had presented in that medium case.
Next.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Abisler. I'm also a town meeting member. I have a slightly different perspective on what's going on. I don't deny that we should have clean water for everyone. And the difficulty I have is who's representing any of the people in town, like myself, that have well water? We're buying the water company, we're taking our taxes and funding it, we're putting in all kinds of funds. I'm not sure if that's just how we do it. Are we getting any, like when my well went out, I had to come up with the funds to put my pump in place and to take care of it and to get my water back online. I didn't get any town funding as such or any assistance. I don't mind helping other people out, but I just like to see that there's some consideration for those on wells. It seems all the discussion has been that 100% of the town is on town water, and this is a done deal. Just my perspective. I'm not trying to cause waves. I'm not trying to deny anybody. I just would like a little bit more information on how the enterprise works so that I know I'm supporting the town, but I'm not supporting everybody in town at my expense.
Stephanie, that's a great question. Any money that comes out of the stabilization account, if it does, would be your tax dollars. Anything to do with the purchase price and having to do with the acquisition of the water company, in addition to that, is coming from the 7,500 residential, the 7,500 ratepayers. So anyone who's a current ratepayer of the Milford Water Company, you are not, you own a well, so you would not be part of that cost.
Next.
Tim Spino. This is an interesting conversation that we're having. I got to be honest with you. I don't know if I'm for it or against it. Let's start there. We're talking about buying a business. In my left hand, I'm hearing about how this business, the water company, is poorly run. It's poorly managed. It doesn't make much money. They haven't made any improvements that they promised they were going to make. On the other hand, we're talking about spending approximately $63 million of taxpayer money, plus an additional $10 million over a period of time for capital improvements. We're talking about buying a business. I'm hearing all this goodness flowing out of everybody here. And yet, I look at the recommendations that I was just given today, and item number 1 says, on the recommendations from the Lincoln Group, develop a comprehensive business plan and long-term capital improvement plan for the acquisition of the Milford Water Company based on objectives to provide quality and consistency to consumers. Yet we're going to ask town committee members to vote without seeing this comprehensive plan. What is our plan? Our plan isn't just to buy a water company and spend our money and keep telling us how good it's going to be, how well we're going to manage that. I personally don't know if we're going to manage it well. What was the checkpoint for the current company? What did we do to keep them in check and balances? We got burned by a tank that went poor before. And we all stepped back and said, oh, that's not going to happen again. Now I'm standing, it's like deja vu all over again, guys. There's nothing here that's impressing me to say, yep, I'm going to go for it. On the other side, there's nothing here telling me I'm going to back away from it either. But I think our due diligence, I'm in the business world, I understand due diligence extremely well. I've been involved in business plans. I also know you don't go before your board or you don't go before a vote without having some more common sense in a business plan to tell us what are we to gain. Don't tell me it's going to be good water. By gosh, it better be good water, and if it isn't, you all should be doing something about it now. Why don't we have somebody that's checking them? What happened? What happened between the water tank field and today? What happened? Tell me. I don't know. But this doesn't impress me. There's some contradictions in here. I sat here for about 20 minutes going through it, listening at the same time. We've got somebody standing up here telling that, Mr. Taylor, I believe you made a comment about there needs to be an increase in water supply and water quality. Twice in this report, it states, if you read it, that there isn't an increase in water. In fact, I'm quoting from page 24, water usage is at historical lows and potentially continuing to decline. Do you even read this? Again, it's a business plan. I don't see a business plan. I'm not sure we're ready to go after this. You haven't sold me on it. And I really don't think we have all the answers. And I don't know what our gain is. Tell me what our gain is. Is it a financial gain? When do we see it? 30-year debt we're picking up. Is there more debt that we don't know about? Once you tap into there, there's going to be more debt. Once you start replacing pipes. How come they weren't checked before? When they went after these rate increases, why didn't we step up? They put a plan together and said, we're getting this increase to do this and this. Now, today I'm hearing nobody in this town checked them out. Why? How did that happen? I don't know, guys. I'm not sold.
All right, again, I let you stray a little bit from asking the question, but I think there's a question in there. If anyone wants to try to address Mr. Walsh?
You actually answered some of your own questions. So let me go back to, you made reference to Zach and the supply issue. Okay, that was water is declining. It's not that water is declining, it's that we have almost 2 wells that are offline right now. We want to buy water. I don't know what you want to do, but I want to water my lawn. I want to wash my, let me finish, please. Let me finish. Okay, so that's one of the things that's going on. Okay, the other thing, as I said to you earlier tonight, is that I know it's preliminary. I get that. But I said to you earlier, I used the word trust. We have to go forward. Okay, we have to hire, people that are going to run it properly. Exactly to your point, put a business plan together. Okay, the problem is that if we don't move on it right now or as soon as possible, it possibly could be sold to a private company. You realize that there are private companies out around the state of Massachusetts right now buying water companies. And do you want some other company to come into our community and buy our water company and now they could control over us? I don't want to do that. And again, if you could sit where I am and have run for election, talk like you did, and then get the documents and be in executive sessions and see the information that you're getting, you would understand. You would, and I'm not being critical of you. I'm just saying is that, but we got to go forward. There are things that need to be repaired that the water company, you made a great reference. 2009, I used the word catastrophic. We had a catastrophic failure, tank field. Well, how can it be 2017, and maybe we haven't got that catastrophic failure, but we're still dealing with issues? You made reference to running a business. If you were running a business, would you think that was acceptable to your customers, that in 2009, you had a catastrophic failure that really impacted their life, and in 2017, maybe not as bad, but they're still dealing with lack of supply, brown water. You can't get the supply to them. That's unacceptable. And that's why we're saying, yes, I agree with you. Business plan needs to be done. Management has to be changed. But we got to move forward. We got to move forward so that we can do all those things and improve the quality of water and the delivery of water to our citizens in the town of Milford.
May I respond, please?
Okay, again, I didn't want to get into a question.
I won't get winded. Number one, trust is earned. Don't stand here and tell me, trust us, trust me, trust us. 2009, we trusted you to fix this thing. It wasn't fixed. You allowed a water company to continue unchecked. And now here we are today trying to buy them. I still don't know what I'm getting in the end. Number two, talking about some other company buying them, I don't know. Would they be better? Would they be less expensive to us overall? Will we have to pick up $63 million plus another $10 million in debt for that other company? I don't think so. So I don't know the answer to your question, Mike, about should we allow another company to buy it? But I still don't think we're there, and I still think we're going to ask town committee members to vote when they don't have all the information. I don't think there's enough there. I just think there's a lot of yeses here, but there's not enough here to really sell me on going yes if I were voting on it. Thank you.
Tim, I understand your point of view, and I got to tell you, there was a lot of time through this process that I shared many of your thoughts and comments. So let me try to answer some of your questions. The supply side problem has been much a result. I'm not talking about 5 years ago. I'm not talking about 3 years ago. There were many communities in drought, but I'm talking about specifically this year when they've got so many wells offline. Again, those wells are failing. They're becoming plugged. They either need to be re-drilled or the mechanical issues need to be resolved. But my understanding is they need capital improvement. So it's getting wells back online. It's not tapping new supplies. It's just getting the equipment functioning. The other thing you talked about, and it was a great question, there's a business plan. The business plan isn't here. And I'll agree with you. I think we have more to do there. But let me tell you where it begins with me. In 2010, Tater and Howard, a private engineering firm, was consulted by the Milford Water Company to put together a capital improvement plan. They've not executed that capital improvement plan. We don't own it today. So I can't go in there and tell you where every nut and bolt is. That comes over time with the water commissioners, and it comes over time with the relationship with the employees that exist. However, starting off getting the third-party information, the engineering firms, and getting their capital improvement plans executed is a start. The other thing is, for some reason, people are of the opinion, and I appreciate your point of view, we're the Board of Selectmen, right? We're in charge of everything. We're not in charge of the private Milford Water Company. We hold no authority over the private Milford Water Company. We can't hold them accountable. So while I appreciate that citizens here are representing that they would like me to do that, there's nothing more that I would like, in some cases, to have that authority. But we don't have it. It's the DEP who manages, the Department of Environmental Protection, that manages water companies, their quality of water, and the quantity of water that they can pump. So this Board of Selectmen, if you're holding us accountable for the quality of the water company, what happened in '09, and where we are since '09, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but we're not able to do that. It is the DEP. We contact the DEP frequently. We tell them about the issues. It was just the last meeting that we had last Wednesday where we asked the town administrator to contact the DEP and let them know about our problems and also better understand what they were doing about this brown water. But that's the extent of control and authority the Board of Selectmen have.
It's a hard pill for me to swallow. It is really hard for me to understand that our town fathers had no power over a water company, and you have to go to the state. And why didn't we go to the state more frequently since 2009 instead of waiting for this and finding all of this out? You saw the same thing the state saw. You saw that they put in front of them, these are where the improvements are, this is what we're going to do with it. But again, there was no checks. I don't expect the state to do it. I don't believe in it. But, for us, from a standpoint, we vote for y'all. So maybe we need to change our votes. I don't know.
You could, and I'm okay with that, and we all understand the peril of making bad decisions as elected members of elected officials. But that's not really the issue. My point is, if you elect new members, they are not going to be able to hold the water company accountable.
I disagree.
The best they can do is contact the DEP.
I disagree.
Okay.
I think as town fathers, you represent us. You should be going to the state.
All right, I think we've had enough. Let's go to the next question. All right, let's get to the next question.
Robert Callahan, Precinct 3. I have a question, actually several questions, and like my former speaker here, I too can't figure out whether I want to vote for this, because one hand, I see a lot of flaws with this paper as well. One of the deepest ones, I'm kind of a nuts and bolts guy. Having over 30 years in the heavy construction industry, I see a $12,000 budget. And I asked the Finance Committee, where did they come up with that number, where our infrastructure, where you got tanks that are almost 100 years old, 92 years old, 50 years old, 40 years old, you got wells. $12 million, it seems like a very unrealistic number to me. Is there a line item someplace where we could go in there and look at them?
Anyone, Zach?
Yeah. Thank you. The $12 million does represent a 10-year plan. As mentioned a couple times, we had reviewed an engineering study, Tatter and Howard. We've had our own study done by Woodward and Current. It's in multiple phases: distribution system, storage rehab, hydrant locations, various phases, like I mentioned. I think you're alluding to the pipes underneath the ground. So we have a very extensive list of all of this.
Is that extensive list available to the public, to the town meeting member?
It's available on the website, yes.
Okay, under the Treasury? Under the accounting?
It has its own, nope, it has its own page dedicated to the water company.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
if
you.
you open it up, it's right there on the main page, and this information is there, and it does break it down line item by line item, as you're hoping it does.
Thank you.
Okay.
Same line of questioning on the Tatum and Howard plan, 15-year plan. If I understand it, it was well over a $20 million cap expenditure plan that they spent $2 million on. So to me, that's still $18,000 to $20,000 in capital expenditure improvement that needs to be done, but we're planning 12. So I have a very similar question on how is our plan different than what was recommended in 2010?
Zach?
Yeah, so again, the $12 million was looked at in order to optimize what we could do in that 10-year plan. Some of the items could be delayed, others were identifying potential issues that may break. Also, that $12 million is additional funding. Built into the operational expenses is also a number of $250,000 per year that's identified as simply renew and replace that would take care of a lot of those items as well.
Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have two questions, if I may. Zach, you mentioned the fact that we have about $100 million bonding. How is that bonding going to affect over the next 15 to 20 years with the fact that the high school may be coming online?
Presented at the last forum, and I'll say it again tonight. Again, all of this debt would be within the enterprise fund. It is considered by raters to be outside the debt limit and demonstrated that it has its own acquired revenue stream as well. So theoretically, no impact.
Thank you. One more question, Mike. Chairman of the Finance Committee. We're going to inherit probably 15 new employees with all the benefits incumbent upon them. How is that going to affect our fiscal budgets year to year?
Absolutely, and great question. And I can't point out enough that the water company will run as a completely separate entity, just like the sewer does. All their funding, their employees, their capital improvements, everything is going to come from the taxes that are taking in from the water users, not the taxpayers of Milford, the water users, okay? So all the water bills that go out, that will fund everything that has to do with the water company. So everyone comes in and they say, well, $63 million, well, that's a lot of money for the town of Milford to take on. Well, I will tell you that the town of Milford really is not taking on the $63 million. The town of Milford Water Company is taking that on. And it's a very important distinction. And as Zach just pointed out, if anything comes up for the town, that debt does not affect us. The operational costs of the new Milford Water Company department does not affect our operational budget at all. If we take this on, it does not mean one less police officer. It does not mean one less textbook for our children. It does not mean one less road is paved. This has absolutely no consequence whatsoever to the operational budget of our town. The only part that it does affect, as was brought up earlier, is the initial seed money that we need to bring from our stabilization fund. That is repayable, though, so it's something that the water company is going to pay back. The water company department will pay back as part of the bills. So as a taxpayer of Milford, the acquisition of the water company, besides the legal expenses, will have absolutely no effect on you whatsoever. It will have effect to the water users and those taxpayers, but that bill is going to be paid regardless of whether you write the check to the Milford Water Company or you write it to the town of Milford. It's basically going to be the same bill because their increase is going to be exactly the same, and yet you now control the water. And the other thing that came up was, what do we benefit? If someone lives in an apartment and they pay $1,000 a month, and someone lives in a house and pays $1,000 a month, in 30 years at the end, the guy who lived in the house now owns his house. We would own the water company after 30 years, and we would be able to do that within the rate structure that we have presented to you. So I know that this doesn't affect a lot of the people in the room right now, but your children and your grandchildren will now benefit from the fact that we own our water company. Just like nowadays when you say, I don't have a mortgage on my house anymore, I can now go on an extra vacation. You know, it's the same thing with this water company. When it's paid off, and unfortunately, you know, I hope I'm there to see it in 30 years, but that is the benefit. When you say, what's the benefit of acquiring this? Not only will we now have control over the water, which I agree with you. I have a hard time asking a guy in Boston to fix my water. I want to be able to fix it. And by bringing it in town, we now can fix it. But on top of that, what do we acquire financially? We now own a water company in 30 years, and we don't have the debt for it anymore. So that significantly affects what your bill would be, because that's going to go down as the debt service goes down. We now would own that asset after 30 years. In 30 years of paying the Milford Water Company your bill, you don't own anything. And that's a huge advantage of being able to acquire the water company on a financial and asset point of view.
Next question.
Hi, Eric Zago, 13-year resident here in Milford. I sort of have a business law 101 question. If we're looking for the indemnification and warranties, but the Milford Water Company is then dissolved, what entity is actually there to satisfy that indemnification?
Answer?
Yep. You deal with that on both the long and short term. You'll ensure that some entity at the end of the day, and that's the current shareholders, will continue to have long-term liability, and that'll all be defined again in the agreement. In the short term, for some of the big ticket items, in order to ensure that the town is covered, we'll also essentially have a fairly sizable escrow or holdback in order to make sure that all the points of the deal come true as we expect, you know, for purposes of the pension, for purposes of any tax liability. That's going to be a real big one in the way that we've structured this particular deal, and we have an agreement about who's paying the taxes once the company is acquired and essentially liquidated, and that'll be on the company end to do that, but we'll make sure that we hold back substantial amounts of dollars in connection with an escrow in order to accommodate that. And then again, the tracing back the longer term liability will be back to designated parties, regardless of whether or not the corporate entity continues to exist.
Joe?
My name is Joseph J. Cosentino. I live at 22 Farm Street. I grew up on Holland Street in Milford. All right? And I know what's in the ground. I used to drink water from a running brook when I was a young fella. You buy the water company, and we're going to be in more debt than we'd ever be, because what's in the ground are all bad pipes. And we're not going to solve that with cheap money. It's going to cost us more money, and we're going to get burned. You people are trying to tell people what's not there. I've been there, and I know what it is. I drank from water brook. I had them up my house, as a matter of fact, the other day. Okay? And the fellow from the water company was very good to me. He said to me, if it's our problem, we will take care of it. They're all over Milford with bad water going all over the place, and they were helping us. They come into my home and help me out. And you people want to talk about that. Are you going to pay us after for that? I don't think so. I would never buy it, let them solve the problem.
Joe, save that for next week, or the 26th. Okay, next question. I didn't hear a question on that.
Hi, Russ Abyssal. I'm also a town meeting member. Excuse me. A couple questions. One on page 24, other considerations. We talk about increase its access to high-quality water resources, but then under water usage and supply risk, it says there's very limited options and alternatives to finding new sources. Now, I understand that we're going to have a capital improvement to increase the productivity of a couple wells to bring them back online, which will also help. We're also budgeting for a 4-year drought every 4 years, a drought every 4 years, not a 4-year drought, a drought every 4 years, which would decrease the amount of water that's coming in. First question is, what's the historical average of the number of droughts? Secondly, where are we going to find any new water resources besides purchasing it? Are there any capital plans to drill new wells so that we will have water available for future use? We're building all over town now. And the third point I'd like to make is there's been a lot of discussion about the reprehensible 30% increase that the water company has proposed to the DPW, but our 30% increase is just fine, apparently. If they're only making a little bit of money with their 30% increase, as I see on the page where the income is less than optimal for capital improvements, how is our 30%, which is the good 30%, going to fund those capital improvements when theirs is not?
Good job.
Let me speak to a little bit of that because I've dealt with the water company and their rate cases for the past 38 years. And they come in periodically, as you know. They got a 33% increase in about 2010, and 2 years later they got a 50% increase, and each time we have to delve heavily into the water company. And they're looking for a 30% increase this time. And I've looked at their filing, and they're going to present a strong case for that. But one thing you do have, there's a lot of aspects of this, but one thing you do have to keep in mind that part of their goal, of course, is to increase their profit margins, which, as you've heard, reviewers indicated have been very, very low. So that's what drives a lot of their increase, is the ability to get more money so they have more profit, so they have better profit margins, and they can actually pay returns to their investors. And the additional aspect of it is, of course, that increased revenue for the water company means increased federal taxes, which are substantial, and increased state taxes, which are substantial. Those are just three aspects, and there's more to it than that. The key is, I think, from our perspective, is that those same dollars that are produced by the 30%, the town will have more of that available to utilize effectively to undertake the capital plan that's out there and advance it, much more so to the water company. The way the system is set up with the DPU doesn't really work that way. They're trying to recover for things that they've already spent and being reimbursed for things they've already spent. We're looking to, whatever the percentage that your water commissioners will decide, whether it's 15, 20, or 30% for the initial boost, is all going to be available for the capital improvements and hopefully used effectively.
Richard?
Richard Morrison, town meeting member. I own property on South Bow Street that's been in my family for nearly 100 years. And I happen to have the street card from the water company that tells me that my property first received water 1 year after the water company was organized. I can now look out my front window. It also tells me that the service line to my property was replaced in 1939. I can now look out my front window and see 4 other properties in very close proximity to mine where the service line has failed within the past 4 or 5 years and has been repaired. So I would tell you that it seems to me that the water main on South Bow Street and probably a number of other streets in the center of town The original pipe's 100 years old. As part of the capital improvement, how is that going to be dealt with in terms of the age of the pipes we have in the ground? A couple of years ago, I think there were at least 2 and maybe 3 consecutive failures of the water main on East Main Street in the area of Fountain Street. Not Fountain, Fortune Street, Fortune Boulevard. And what they did was they repaired the section that failed, which didn't do anything for the section 100 yards down the road. What is the plan to deal with the age of the pipes over time? And part of my concern about that is over the past number of years, we have spent a lot of money having the highway department resurface a lot of roads in town, and they've done a great job. Are we now going to be in a position of tearing up those roads and replacing water mains? I have no idea how one repairs a water main. So I really wonder, what is the plan originally was to borrow an additional $7 million and then an additional $7 million after that for capital improvements. I understand that some of that certainly will go to repairing the pumps. What's the rest of the money for? Do we know what other capital improvements would be done with, whether it's a 30% rate increase with us, or what was the plan for these 2 bonds at $7 million? What are we going to repair? Thank you.
Zach?
As I mentioned with a similar question earlier, we do have a detailed recommended capital improvement plan from Tatter and Howard, of which it does get very specific. I'll read right here: location, Main Street, Central Street, South Bow Street, water main diameter 12 inches, length 300 feet, cost $65,000. So it is laid out here. It's in different phases. This particular one is phase 1, water distribution system. Throughout this analysis, if you will, it's extremely detailed of all the various points in time in which they were replaced, the exact type of material of all these different pipes throughout the distribution system. And it's basically industry standard to go through a certain amount of mileage per year, and the engineering firm has completely adopted that in conjunction with a risk analysis based on the type of material, the location, the time in which it was put in, and it is displayed and prioritized, in which, as mentioned, the water commissioners would go into a much deeper level of analysis and determine what to replace. Further, you mentioned something about the highway surveyor going through and replacing a road, and that it wouldn't make sense to then tear it up. So one of the points in this Lincoln Group analysis here is that there is absolutely opportunity for cost savings through looking to other departments and coordinating our efforts to avoid exactly what you're talking about, and if anything, the complete opposite, and actually save some money. So that's something that we would absolutely be looking to as well.
Next question.
This is for the selectmen. Based on the conversation we've had tonight and the questions, I would say there's probably a 50-50 chance that this is not going to go forward. If that's the case, what is your plan B?
Bill? No.
I'm sorry, can you hear me? There we go.
Yes.
No, great question. Well, Plan B is if the town meeting doesn't vote by 2/3, which is a tough goal and a tough ask, to purchase and acquire the Milford Water Company. Plan B is it's business as usual. So there's no further recourse. We continue to work in the best we can with the Milford Water Company. That's a privately held company.
If I could just...
Please do.
Okay. Have you ever explored using a P3 system, public-private partnership? It's used all over the United States for large projects, et cetera. Did you guys explore that when you were looking at your options?
I'll turn that over to Jerry. I do not believe we have. I'm familiar with that, but I don't believe we have in this process.
Yeah, that kind of public-private partnership is not an option in this instance. The Milford Water Company, as I indicated earlier, legislatively chartered in 1881. They're an operational company. They are going to move, as you know, they filed for a rate increase, so one thing that will happen if the town does not vote to go forward with this acquisition is then we'll go forward representing the town in that rate case. It'll go before the DPU. It takes more than a few months, difficult process, but they'll get a rate increase at some point in time. That's the process that's in place in Massachusetts for private water companies. There's no ability under the law now, and I don't think there ever will be because the numbers of companies now are so small, to have this kind of public-private partnership that you're referring to. It's going to be either publicly operated or it's going to continue under the current Milford Water Company operations.
You say the Attorney General's supervising that?
No, well, the Attorney General intervenes in that case. I represent the town and the ratepayers in trying to oppose everything that we can oppose in a rate case, and that will go on if the town meeting does not go forward, and the water company will continue to operate as they always have. But again, under the current law, those are the only two options. There's no middle ground for any kind of public-private partnership or anything like that.
Thank you.
Next question.
Yes, Rudolph Scholl, live right over here at 16 West Fountain. Was listening earlier talking about how the water company with their 10-year plan, $20 or $22 million, basically wasn't said, but in so many words, how it was, they should have got it done, but they didn't. Well, the proposal is $12 million for upgrades and everything else. So some other stuff is going to be put aside. Isn't that basically what they did? So what's the difference going to be?
Anyone want to address that?
There's a delay. So I was convinced through the process that we had the ability to do it through efficiencies and through the right type of plan. So actually following a capital improvement plan and through an enterprise fund is what you would look at as a model within the town. If you look at the sewer department and its enterprise fund, actually the sewer department is a classic case of there's a building and a system that's whose useful life has been long extended through the repair and maintenance and capital improvement. It's exactly what they did to get more out of that system and to be smarter. So if all the screw pumps and the different significant systems they replaced over time rather than come back to the town or repaired, rather than come back to the town for significant capital improvements like the water company did. If you all remember, we got a 57% rate increase when they were asking for 82. There hasn't been anything over time I've been on the Board of Selectmen for 12 years. There has been nothing from that senior management of the water company that's led me to believe that any future rate increases are actually going towards capital. It's not been demonstrated in the past, so I have no reason to believe that the future is any different. The only time I saw significant capital improvement out of the Milford Water Company is when the DEP had a gun to their head. Through consent orders, and frankly, through aggressive means, they made sure that the Milford Water Company built the treatment plant that would address the issues that caused E. coli. And by the way, it wasn't just a tank with a hole in it. It wasn't just the fact that they couldn't identify where all their pipes were underground. It wasn't just because they were unable to put chlorinators, injectors, to kill the E. coli. It was a series of issues. It's a great study, by the way, if anybody wants to ever look at the DEP documents and the consent orders and the issues the Milford Water Company had in 2009. Because it's a long list of things that contributed to that. So I know people are of the opinion that it was a water tank. My point is simply, I have nowhere to go to study where the water company is going to use their money, other than to look at past practice. Their history is all that I have to give me an indicator of what they might do in the future. And again, it's not because of the employees, in my opinion. And one of the other things you can look at in past rate increases is the number of times the town of Milford, with the DEP, challenged the relationship between the Milford Water Company and R.H. White Construction. The need to go out for bids, the need to go out and make sure it was competitive, the need to make sure that it just wasn't funding, through their construction, another segment of a business that was related. We've been challenging that for years, and we've got little headway with the DEP in making sure that relationship was above board and at arm's length. I have questions remaining about that. How one company can push funds to another company and have the work done. And they'll tell you this time they did some bids. So there's a long history of things that contribute to my skepticism, but basically it comes from having watched them in the past and assuming, for lack of any other data, that that's the way they're going to operate in the future.
Next question.
Hi, I'm George Swimer, Precinct 7, Milford resident for almost 50 years. I just have two questions based on my own experience in the private sector. I don't understand necessarily if we have enough information on the retiree benefits and how they'll be handled. You mentioned that there's an enterprise involved here. Will they have the pension and retiree liability on their books, or will the town of Milford have it on our books? Do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, sir. So we'll answer that in two parts. We'll first deal with the existing pension plan, the liabilities under it, and the relationship between the current employees and the private Milford Water Company. That essentially will be segregated, and it'll be our job to work to ensure that there is no liability coming over. Typically in these particular type of cases, those defined pensions go through a very particular federal regulated process of termination, and we want to make sure that that happens. We want to make sure that we have the actuary data, and we have confidence in it, that it'll be fully funded, and that there will be no leftover residual risk, certainly to the town on multiple levels. And I'll turn to Zach to talk about employees coming over.
The second half of that question was, if I'm hearing it correctly, asking if the enterprise fund, or how is it going to pay for it? One, yes, it will, in actually two different fashions. One, through what we call indirect cost allocation, and that's how that would pay for the health insurance. We do have in the operational budget of the general fund our health insurance budget of 14 million, give or take. And what happens at the end of the year is the benefits department calculates exactly what the health cost of the employees were, and through an accounting journal entry from me, I allocate it over to the enterprise fund for every cost associated with that, dental, all that life insurance, stuff like that. Pension cost, it is one total number, but the enterprise fund is responsible for its portion on an annual basis, and that gets paid directly out of the enterprise fund, and it's taken care of that way. It is on our books overall. The audited financial statements are broken out per business type funds, which would include the enterprise fund. However, all costs associated with it is, in fact, the enterprise fund.
Do they have a trust fund set up with some value to it? Or is it a pay-as-you-go pension, retiree pension?
The town pension is...
No, their pension.
Oh, sorry.
You know, I don't have the specific details on exactly off the top of my head on how that is organized. It's certainly something I'm happy to follow up on with you individually, but I can assure you we have had our experts and the company's experts essentially agree to the termination process, the full funding of that, fully compliant with IRS regulations, fully compliant with the pension, federal pension oversight regulatory process as well.
Okay, because that kind of leads to my second question, protection for a price adjustment post-purchase and sale. How do we do that? in case of fraud or misrepresentation?
Sure. Again, that's going to go back to something that that Selectman Buckley had spoken to, certainly regarding the representations and warranties in the purchase and sale agreement, that specific remedies for obviously breach of those, as well as an indemnification that really gives those particular provisions. Again, not to oversimplify, saying that they have represented exactly all the material facts of the deal. They haven't, certainly engaged in fraud. If there would be that occasion, we certainly would have recourse in order to say that. There will be specific items that we know carry a certain level of risk that we will hold dollars back in escrow for a period of time, and then over time, as those issues become more certain, those escrow funds get released in the future.
My experience in acquisitions is that there's a 50-50 chance of a price adjustment later on in something where there's so much unknown as this particular entity seems to be as far as its physical state.
We can appreciate, and I think, the term we've tried to use, with the selectmen and trying to protect the town's interests is, there's no 100% guarantee, but what we will do is build essentially a purchase and sale agreement, or if we, a stock purchase agreement, or merger agreement, depending on the way this gets structured at the end of the day, that is as bulletproof as certainly as possible. Can you plan for absolutely everything? We will try, but there will always potentially be an issue. We'll work to try to figure out and eliminate those. That's why we spent the time and, to be quite frank, the resources on the due diligence process. On top of the fact that this is an investor-owned utility that's been fully regulated for its entire existence, and we have a pretty good understanding as a baseline of who they are and what they were because of the very public nature of their books to begin with.
Okay. Thank you.
Richard?
So looking at the $20 million of capital improvements that the water company agreed to make beginning in 2010, and then we find out they've only spent $2 million of that. I would like to know where in the whole process of the town negotiating a sale price for this company, was that fact discovered? Was that known before the price was agreed to, or did that come up with the most recent financial review? And what is the legal liability of the water company for having made that commitment? Was that part of a consent decree with the state? Is there some recourse to cause them to have to renegotiate the price to pick up some of that tab that they committed to? How much would they have spent if they had followed through with the plan starting in 2010? How much would they have spent of that $20 million at this point in time? It seems like a real surprise to us that that fact exists, that they committed to $20 million worth of improvements and have only spent $2 million. And it feels like we're getting hung with that failure on their part.
Mike?
Jerry?
Yeah, I'll try to answer parts of that if I can. As you've heard, that Tate and Howard report, which either is online or will be online shortly, it's a 2010 report, and we had a rate case in 2010. We had the investigation of the water company that was done at the behest of the Board of Selectmen in process at that time, and that's part of the whole process that brought about the requirement that they put together a capital plan, which they did. So we were aware of its inception, and in 2012, when they sought another rate increase, we were certainly aware of it and spent a lot of time arguing about what they were doing and not doing before the DPU in terms of setting their rates. But in terms of monitoring it, it was something that they had to do, and they did it, but there was nothing in it or nothing in the law or regulations that required that they move at any particular speed in doing it. As a private company, they were free to make their own decisions as to how they would proceed with whatever aspect of the recommendations of Tate and Howard were made. So again, they had to make those decisions. They did make those decisions. Obviously, what we've discovered now is that as the years have gone by, not in our view, enough has been done by any stretch. So that's about the best I can say in relation to that. Again, there was no ability, requirement on them, no ability of anybody, be it the state or the local level, to force them to do any of that without that kind of administrative consent order that came as a result of the 2009 crisis. Other than that, it was their choice as to the speed or lack of speed which they moved for that plan.
Dan Nero, Mr. Kincaid, would you enlighten us on what you envision the salary of the commissioners to be? Would it be something like the sewer commissioners, a nominal stipend, or do you see it more as a $100,000 a year job? And before you reply, Mr. Walsh hasn't given me a response to his expansion of water resources that's going to satisfy our needs, since we haven't done any for a very long period of time.
Sure. I'll hand the mic over to Mike. Yes, we expect it to be, or I personally expect it, to be a stipended position, much like the sewer commissioners. I do hope initially that the folks that, if this passes at town meeting, the folks that we appoint up to the election do have a lot of time, because I'd like them to spend a lot of time and learn as much about the water department as possible. But yes, a stipended position, much like the sewer commissioners.
Dan, I actually did go to answer you, but when I went to answer you, you sat down. Okay, so I want to be correct on that, okay?
All right, I'm standing now.
No, thank you. The answer to that question is exactly what the three of us have been talking about all night. Bring online all the resources that we currently have right now that aren't online. We have 1.5 or 2 wells right now that are down or up pumping to capacity. So we're not talking about drilling new wells. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about bringing all the resources that are currently under the control of the Milford Water Company back online, running efficiently the way they should.
That is a response, but the water company had all those wells online for a long period of time, all the resources that were available to them, but they were not able to still supply us. They've been restricted by the DPU from developing any sources of water. So I think let's presume what I'm saying is factual. There are no places to get any additional water, but in fact there are. There are at least a dozen quarries within a mile of the water company. There's Louisa Lake. There are other wells that could be developed, and as you said, redrill the other wells. Nothing has been done. But the cost of all of that is millions of dollars. And I think we're doing a little bit of dreaming here this evening. And that is people with no experience of developing water, no experience in running a water company, no real business experience in a $63 million expenditure, which turns into well over $100 million when you add up all of the figures. And trying to convince us to go into a municipal system and let government do it, when I think what you said just a few moments ago was, if you look around the world, you find that all of the problems are caused by government. None of the solutions are caused by government. It's all by private industry who develops solutions, especially in our capitalist system, the greatest country in the world. And we want to change that somehow, and again, equate it to running a sewer system. That's exactly what the handout said tonight. Equate it to running a sewer system.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next question.
An interesting point was brought up when I sat down that I hadn't thought about, and that was of this public-private thing. And I think the answer that was provided was based on going to the current water company and saying, can we do something on a public-private? And it seems there's a charter or something that the answer would be no. However, why would that stop us from talking to another qualified water company on a friendly basis? We hear that, do you want another water company coming in and buying it out? Again, my answer is, I don't know. Who are they? What's their expertise? What's their history? We don't have any expertise in this town. So on a public-private basis, why can't we look at, or at least discuss, is there another water company out there that's qualified that we may want to talk to, again, on a friendly basis, on a public-private opportunity? And again, I don't half know what I'm talking about here, but there's some common sense here. You know, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Right now, there's a bunch of ducks walking around here.
Right, but to answer that,
I may have an answer to the question.
if I may
Mike?
answer that question, one thing you have to look at is that what I said earlier is that if the Milford Water Company gets bought by another private company, we get the same issue as far as control goes. I don't know about quality, but about control. A very important point that I made earlier tonight was that if you have a problem in your home on a Friday night, and you call the water company right now and you don't get a response, you call one of us, you elected us, you call one of us, trust me, we're going to call one of the water commissioners, and we're going to make sure that they're at your house, and probably one of us is going to show up there as well to make sure that you as a taxpayer are getting what you deserve, and that's quality water. So that's a big advantage over acquiring the water company. So sell it to another private company, that end of it, you're going to be in the same boat. Maybe the quality will get better. I don't know that, but we got held accountable earlier by somebody saying, well, what do you as elected officials, the Board of Selectmen, why haven't you gotten involved? It's a private company. We can't get involved. Yeah, we can pick up the phone, we can call, but you know what? They'll do the same thing to us because they don't have to answer to us. We purchased this water company. We put it under the control of the town of Milford. We put together a water commission. We put together correct management, okay? And then, yes, when you call me or you call Will or you call Bill and say, hey, I got a concern, we're gonna work with it because we're able to do that. Right now, we can't. We're in the same boat you are, and I agree with you.
You haven't touched the answer to my question. My question is, why haven't we? You're repeating yourself, but that's okay. The question was, why haven't we evaluated, or why don't we evaluate a public-private with another company, another private company? I'm not talking about the current company. It has been stated that they won't or they can't. Don't know. But that's what I heard. But also what I had heard is that this public-private, I don't know if I'm saying it properly, this public-private is something that is done on a more than, I don't know if it's frequent or not.
Jerry, I think wants to
Let me
contribute.
try to answer the question again. Again, this water company was chartered by the legislature of Massachusetts in 1881, and they're still operating under that charter. And that charter, among other things, gives them the exclusive franchise for selling water in the town of Milford, Massachusetts. The town of Milford can't sell water to you, only the Milford Water Company. So we don't have an option of going out there and see if we can get a competitor like cable television. It doesn't work that way. They have an exclusive franchise. And that legislation, which is still in effect, gives us one right in this regard, which is we have the right to acquire the Milford Water Company. They cannot refuse, but we have to arrive at a price. The price has to be negotiated. So operating under that statute, that's where we are. But this alternative option you're talking about, which may work very well in other settings, may work very well in other jurisdictions, doesn't have any application here in Milford. We have to operate under the 1881 statute. We have to operate under the rules that the legislature has set up, for better or for worse. And our only options are to let the Milford Water Company continue to have the exclusive franchise or acquire it.
Okay, but
Next question.
No,
Let's have some of the other people ask questions.
when you're
David.
acquiring them, why can't you get a partner to acquire? You're basically spreading out the liabilities, you're spreading out the expense. That has nothing to do with what you just
Proposal right
said.
now is to acquire the Milford Water Company.
That's what the proposal is. We're asking you to be a little creative. Evidently, you don't want to be.
Fellow in the orange. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Jeff Nero, town meeting member, precinct 8. I think what Tim was referring to, and this is not my question, was why don't we look at companies like Eversource that just acquired Aquarion? That's part of his question about acquiring the company. But my question is more for Zach. Can you give us the difference to the ratepayer? Catastrophic failure today. Milford Water Company has it. They need to borrow $5 million. They own it. They're private. They have to fund it. Who pays for it? Versus we own it. Same thing happens. What's the difference in the rates?
Zach?
if something like that were to happen, we would turn to the state revolving fund, in which something that significant, we would not be able to borrow. We wouldn't have the fund. Something that significant would turn to the Clean Water Trust, who would have no other choice but to bail us out. So obviously that's a fear that we have. We don't want something that extreme to happen, but that's why we've done so much due diligence into this capital plan. But if it were to go down that way, you would have to seek state assistance, and that's what that revolving fund is there for.
Excuse me, Joe. Zach, thank you for that. But the question is, how does that impact the ratepayers? And what's the difference if we funded it through the state revolving fund or the water company did it through their private funds? Who's paying for that? And what's the difference? Is it going to cost us more money if the water company fixed it?
Okay, if it would cost more money for the water company, because the state revolving fund, something like that, could potentially be no interest whatsoever, but more than likely it would be something like 1% interest. If that were to happen to the existing water company, they would not reap the benefits of something like that. Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Excuse me, can I even clarify even more, Mr. Nero? Everything that happens with the water company and the pipes costs more if they do it than if we do it. Everybody talks about the old pipes in town and how they have to be replaced. If it costs the Milford Water Company $100 million to replace all these pipes, it's going to end up costing the ratepayers about $120 million, because you have to put in their profit and everything else to do it. So everything that the Milford Water Company does, the ratepayers do pay for. Trust me, they're not replacing these pipes just because they feel like it. They're replacing it as a cost of doing business, and then they're going to turn around and they're going to put it on the taxpayers, the ratepayers, excuse me, thank you. Nothing is happening for free that the water company happens. So to your point, if $5 million of repair needs to be done, it's going to be a lot cheaper for the ratepayers if the town of Milford does it, because the water company will do it and then add its profit on top of the $5 million. So the ratepayers will pay considerably more if the water company does those repairs instead of the town of Milford.
Thank you.
The lady on the right over here before you, Joe. Joe? The lady on the right is going to be recognized before you. Please sit down and let her ask a question.
What's that?
Did you hear me, Joe?
I'm going to ask a question.
No, you're not going to ask a question until this lady who's been waiting over here asks the first question, okay? You'll get your chance. We've been sort of swaying back and forth. You haven't been lining up, so
I'll get there.
I think you're cut in front of her.
I'll get there. Go ahead, dear.
Okay. Darlene Jones, Precinct 4, Town Meeting Member. Previously, it was mentioned that the town has had to take care of roads and some structures that were affected by water company. And personally, I live on a 2-block street and has had some businesses with the water company that did involve the town having to come back and fix those issues, like let's say as far as repaving roads. Will our town budget be able to, as far as you said, Scott Crisafulli, be able to, they have fixed them in the past, but be held, who's going to be responsible for making sure that those are fixed properly? And also, too, has work that the water company, has it cost the town money prior to, this option to purchase the water company that people are not aware of, like as far as delaying projects, coordinating projects? I think it came up with, it was mentioned with Zach that it would better coordinate projects within the town.
Yeah, if I can just try to address that to some extent, because I've got familiarity with coordination problems over the years, and they've been there, and Scott Crisafulli and his predecessors would tell you of their occasional frustrations with coordinating with all the utilities that are involved, the water company, the gas company, and others. But I've spoken with Scott and his predecessors over the years, and they all would prefer a situation where they had control over that. As being part of the town, that will, whatever coordination problems that have existed in the past, and they have, can be, at least in terms of the coordination between the water and the street repairs, be eliminated, because it can now be perfectly coordinated by the town. So that will be, how much money is involved, how much savings is involved, I don't have a clue. But the coordination will be a lot better, and the streets, as a result, should be to some degree better.
Joe, next question, Joe.
Yeah,
Question.
I want to point out something to you people. I
question.
called the sewer department the night before. They came up to my home. I was there, and they said to me, they checked all the floor water. They said, your water's fine, Joe, up here. He said, it isn't our problem. I said, all right, I want to thank you. And then they said to me, you call the other department. So that's what I got. I called the other department. They came up and they started looking at all the different things that are happening. You people sitting at a table don't know what happened.
Joe,
you
you
were
asked
there,
the
you wouldn't
question, all
know.
right? We're not interested in your personal problem right now. All right, next question.
People better wake up. You ought to get rid of you.
I personally think it's a good idea to buy the water company, but I'm not sure I'm sold either on a business plan and that we're truly the experts and we can do it better. I hear we're going to be better, we're going to be faster, have better quality. That's great, and we're going to do it for less money. That's fantastic. I'm not sure I've heard the means of how we're going to get there. So I struggle with that. So somebody earlier mentioned having a plan B. I think we do need a plan B. And maybe it's taking all of this due diligence that we've already done, and if we don't get the vote passed to purchase it, maybe we need to present and engage further with Milford Water Company and not just accept bad service. So.
Let me try to touch on that just for a second. So I appreciate the nature of your questions and the questions you've been asking all night. What it's led me to believe is that we need to do a better job. We've talked about, for example, putting information on the website. It's probably not sufficient for what we need to accomplish. We've got, there are business plans in there that talk about what capital is needed, what roads are needed, and how we know that. We should do a better job, so that's what I'm hearing you say. And I appreciate that because I find the way your tone and the way you ask the question to be very constructive, so thank you for that. And the other piece is, I'm not going to run a water company. You don't want me running a water company. Because I can take my collective experience in running a water company, we can put all in the thimble and it won't fill it. But that said, what we are, and we haven't introduced everybody here, but there are engineers here. There are people who have run water companies. They've been our consultants throughout this process. There's more that we need to do beyond just where the capital is going, where the money is going. And I think we have to build a solid case for what that business plan is and show you where the hiring needs to come from. Personally, and I haven't done a great job because there's things that I carry with me over 12 years of experience that I'm realizing through this process of back and forth. For example, I believe one of the biggest inhibitors has been the ownership of the company. And that, by the way, that wouldn't be the first time the ownership of the company has heard that from me. So I'm not saying anything here tonight that I hadn't said directly. And I believe a lot of it is part of the culture they create in sometimes going cheap and sometimes looking to benefit the larger corporation that I talked about earlier in that relationship. And again, that's no secret. That's in the DPU hearings. Those are things that Jerry, our town council, has fought in the past. But I hear you, and I think we need to do a better job, and that is my takeaway for town meeting. So thank you.
Russ?
Hi. One of the other questions I asked previously was the availability of additional water supplies within the town. Has that been studied? Is it possible? I know it's possible, but has it been studied, and what are the probabilities that there will be additional wells to meet future needs of the town?
Yeah, thank you, Russ. That's a question that, frankly, it's not susceptible of a clear answer right now because we would have to get control of this company, get the kind of expertise we would need to then to apply to the operations, and do whatever can be done to see where a supply can be expanded. Now, I'm answering the question in part because over the years in dealing with the water company, I'm aware of what they have done in the past to try to increase supply. They've even sought to look for supply sources out of town. So I'm not being critical of them or not being critical of them. But that kind of question really can't be answered until we've acquired this company, got really competent, the best management possible in there that can then begin to look at that for the long term. It's obviously, as you understand, not a matter of next week opening up another well. The process of getting a well approved, I don't think I'd be off base by saying is a process of many, many, many years. And finding the locations can take a long time. But that's something that's going to come after we've acquired it, and that's going to be a primary goal, I believe, of the new management, which would be not only quality, but where can supply be increased. I think that's probably about the best that can be answered there.
Next question.
Could I ask one follow-up question, something different? In the documentation, it looks at alternative funding sources. I was wondering if you could explain what those would mean. And I'm trying to find that reference. I believe it's on page 3. In the bottom paragraph. No, I'm sorry, it's page, 3. It says, require the town generate sufficient free cash flow to qualify for financing. And then further down it says, need to consider alternative mitigating options. Could you explain what that means, please?
Anyone?
Yeah, I'll take that. That's directly referring to the necessity for a rate increase. As I mentioned in the presentation, we did not want to kick any capital to the back burner in an attempt to make sure that we did not have any rate increase. We had to bite the bullet and realize the only option was to have a rate increase. So that's what that sentence is referring to.
Next question.
I've heard a lot of comments about such as the wells, et cetera. We paid $850,000, I think it was, somewhere in that number, for an engineering study. Did they actually do any physical study, or was it all theoretical? And are we going to get a report, at least a one-page report, to their recommendations? I believe the wells, we got a problem in this town for iron and magnesium, so more than likely they're plugged. And I know at Clark's Island, I used to be up there as a kid, that's covered with iron, not to mention all the refuge people have thrown in over the years. So has anybody done a physical, gone out there and physically gone on the tanks and put an ultrasonic test on it, or gone to the wells and done a test on it, or is this all theoretical?
Anyone?
Again, going back to the Tater and Howard report, which makes numerous recommendations in terms of improvements, that was done by a highly professional, reputable firm, which did everything that good engineering practice would say that they should do to generate that report in 2010. We have access to that, and as you've heard, we know what's been done and what's not been done in terms of that report. In terms of our own ability to review, we've had, it's online, as we indicated, the report from Woodward and Curran, where we've had them review the facilities of the company. But we haven't gone out now to study potential sources or any of that. As I indicated, that's going to come after we've made a decision to acquire it, and then we're going to look, then the new management, the town's management, your management, will then look into all of the improvements that can be made, basing off of the Tater and Howard study, I'm sure, but way beyond that. So again, that Tater and Howard study either is or will shortly be online. The Woodward and Curran study is online. That's the best I think I can tell you.
Tater and Howard is a very reputable engineering firm, and but they normally don't do testing. You have a testing lab do that. So I guess I'm asking again, are we going to get that? Or if we were buying a house, we would have it inspected. If you were buying a $400,000, $250,000 house, you would have it inspected. You'd get a piece of paper telling you what's wrong with it before you made the deal on the price. Have we made this deal without that information? You have that information? Are the town meeting members going to get it before the town votes on this?
Yes, it's yours. So anything that we have, of course. Anything that we have through the course of due diligence is owned by you, the citizens of the town, and we'll make sure we get that out to you. That is yours. So you're entitled to it.
Some of that information is already available on the website. And just for an example, we also have a over 100-page report of extensive field work done on the Echo Lake Dam and other examples of actual field work and testing that I believe you're alluding to, not just theoretical.
Good, thank you.
Next question.
Hi, Bill Sanborn, Precinct 2. I just have a comment and then follow up with a question. My first comment is I have a similar thoughts about some of the previous speakers about the fact that this is already a self-funding enterprise. All right, it's currently being funded by the users of the water. We pay for it through rates, and those rates are funding this system. Whether those, funds are going to this independently, privately owned company, or whether they're going to a new entity that's managed by the town of Milford, it's still the same enterprise. Nothing changes. If there are capital investments required in the current enterprise, we have little influence over the situation. And a perfect example is this report where $12 million in capital was recommended and only 2 was actually expended. We had no control over the fact that, yes, we needed to do $12 million in improvements, but only 2 were done. We had no influence, or little influence, other than going through the state process. So from my perspective, while it's less than ideal, I would rather have more control over our own future and decisions, et cetera, in continuing this enterprise than to continue to pay my rates to an independently private company who's going to do whatever they choose to do, whether or not it's right. So that's one comment that I have to make. And then the follow-up, my question is more about when this is approved, and I have all the confidence that it will be, what is the logical transition plan? Is this something that's going to take place overnight, or is this going to be something that's going to take, months to occur?
It's a good opportunity to introduce Don Walroth. He took the lead from our due diligence finance team. He's going to field that question, as he's got extensive experience in these type of acquisitions.
Yeah, great comments. Thank you. I think we have talked about this in the next 3 months, essentially October through December, to put together a detailed plan. This would include a business plan, but a transition plan as well in terms of how things would be turned over by function, in terms of the capital expenditure plan as well, looking at how do we keep the programs that are in place, that are started, going, so there's no interruption. As an example, on the whole water supply side, there's work that's going on. There's a way to just keep that going, have some kind of interim management perhaps help with that process until you're ready to take it over. But that's all what both Jerry and Zach have been talking about in terms of the 2 pots of money. One is the startup money for your working capital, and the other is the interim planning work that goes on between the time, if this is agreed to, and the time you actually do the acquisition. There are 3 months worth of intensive work to get that plan done. And we have experience doing that, and could help you with that as well. We have an engineer on our team, and across the board, we've got, I think, functionally people that could handle that.
Okay. As I look out, I probably see about 15 to 20 people left in the audience, part of the presenting group. So I think that would conclude our questions and answers. I just want to emphasize, being the moderator of the town meeting, I didn't see a lot of town meeting members here to ask questions. And those people that are not town meeting members, I think it's incumbent upon you on how you feel about this to express those to your town meeting members. So you can go on the town's website, find out who those town meeting members are, and talk to them and tell them how you feel. I was in Market Basket the other day, and the fellow in front of me was from Milford, and I just asked him, I says, what do you hear about the town purchasing the water company? And he went on, the line was long, he went on for about 5 minutes about how he felt. I don't express an opinion being the moderator. I'm not going to tell you how I feel pro or con, because I don't want to be accused of recognizing or not recognizing certain people on the 26th of September. But I think it's important for those people that are watching to let your representative town meeting members know how you feel so they can vote appropriately. So that's the only comment I have. And unless someone else has any comments, I think we'll conclude the meeting.
No, thank you, Mr. Moderator. First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out, and hopefully lots of folks at home can watch this. This has been a topic of conversation long before Mike and I have joined the committee for sure. And I think it's been our job, because so many people have been interested in this, to present everything that we found. And obviously town meeting is going to make that decision. We're going to present everything that's been found. We obviously have an opinion after all the due diligence and everything of that nature over my last 3 years, over Bill's 12, and over Jerry's 38 years. So again, thank you for coming in. Please, a lot of what I had to say, the moderator, Mr. Nofri, already said. Please contact your town meeting members if you do have an opinion, one way or the other, because those are the folks that are going to make the decision. And either way, there's going to be an impact, because this is something that I would say is probably the largest decision to be made in, if not Milford history, then in quite a long time. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. Have a good night.